conservative, constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
House Bill 96, a bill that just passed the Kentucky State House this week, right here in our lovely state, would require a 2-minute moment of silence at the beginning of each K through 12 school day for students to do with as they please. A moment of silence that kids could decide to pray, to sit quietly, to meditate, to think to themselves, for just a few moments to start off each day. Something that, by the way, has many studies proven to cause a moment for children of reflection that creates good mental health. And that makes a lot of sense. I think all of us as adults find that moments of pause, moments of silence is very helpful. But having children be silent for 2 minutes each morning was just too much for the Democrats in Kentucky to handle. It's just too much. And they absolutely have thrown a fit about House Bill 96, calling it prayer in schools. The Christians are coming for our public education. That's where we're supposed to be. That's where the leftists are supposed to be able to push their ideologies without those pesky Judeo-Christian values that built this very country sneaking in. What are you doing? Well, they can take a rest assured moment that it doesn't require prayer. The bill does not require students to pray. It doesn't require them to do anything than to be quiet as a group for 2 minutes each morning. Actually, in fact, let me read you what the bill says. And this is the other thing about the Democrats absolutely losing their mind about this. Now, understand this. Is this bill exactly... do I think it's necessarily the most important thing out there? No. But then again, our legislature does a lot of things that I think aren't very important. Resolutions after resolutions and bills after bills that we look at and say, wow, that's not a real meat and potatoes issue for our Kentucky voters. But when it comes to this, is it necessarily the biggest issue? Probably not. Is it something that you would think would be this controversial, though? You wouldn't think so, because quite honestly, a moment of silence for kids in the morning at school can't be damaging. It can't be harmful to children. See, that's the one thing, is that some studies have proven that this can be helpful. And of course, it does provide those religious students a chance to pray in the morning if they so choose to use it for that. But it doesn't require it. So could a moment of silence be harmful to kids? No, of course not. But the way you would have the Democrats telling it, you would think we just mandated that every single public school child put a cross around their neck and bow before a cross each morning and pray before they begin their school day. And I'm not kidding. But I want to go over what the bill actually says. So House Bill 96, what it actually says. First, it's editing a provision that already exists. Okay, so this is a provision that already exists in law here in Kentucky. This is what it says. It says, at the commencement of the first class of each day in all public schools, the teacher in charge of the room may announce that a moment of silence or reflection not to exceed 1 minute in duration can be observed. Shall be observed, sorry. 1 minute in duration shall be observed. That's what it said. That's what the law on the book said. So already, law on the books here in Kentucky, if a teacher decided to, the homeroom teacher, the first class of the day, on their own, it's not even a school district has to decide it. It's that individual teachers could decide to go ahead and have a 1 minute moment of silent reflection. Now, the Democrats are losing their mind about this bill, and we'll go over what they've said. We'll go over their arguments. Was there a single bill out there to take away the moment of silence at all? Did they have a problem with the teacher offering it? Apparently not. It's not until this bill came along, and it's not just because the bill adds and says shall, so it changes that 1 minute into a mandatory 2 minutes. But it also does this, and they can't have this. They can't risk that in schools, students might have a moment of religious reflection. They can't have that. That flies against their beliefs. So this is another part of the bill. It says, the policy required in paragraph A of the subsection shall ensure that all pupils remain seated and silent and make no distracting display so that each pupil may, in the exercise of his or her individual choice, meditate, pray, or engage in any other silent activity which does not interfere with, distract from, or impede other pupils' exercise of individual choice. The policy shall prohibit district personnel from providing instruction to any student regarding the nature of any reflection that a student may engage in during the moment of silence or reflection. The policy shall require notification be sent to the parents or guardians providing information on the policy and encouraging parents and guardians to provide guidance to their pupils regarding the moment of silence. So nowhere in the bill, right, other than offering up options like prayer along with meditation, silent reflection, the bill does not require at all that students pray. It just requires that there be 2 minutes and a message be sent home to the parents so that they can instruct their children with what they want them to do with those 2 minutes. That's all it says. Now, the way the Democrats would say it, you would think that this is literally destroying K through 12 education. Let's take a listen here to the first clip we have of the first Democrat. I'd go through and tell you all these Democrats' names, but it doesn't matter. They're a Democrat from probably Louisville giving an opinion on this bill that really is just out of control. Take a listen.
So what this is just a way to push prayer into public schools. However, students can already pray in public schools. They can pray around the flagpole. They can have moments of silence on their own. They can pray. There are no restrictions on students praying in school. But simply mentioning prayer in this bill raises constitutional concerns. The Supreme Court has noted that there are heightened concerns with protecting students from the subtle coercive pressure in elementary and secondary public schools that comes from school-mandated religious activities. Because students are impressionable and their attendance is involuntary, courts are particularly vigilant in monitoring compliance with the Establishment Clause in elementary and secondary schools. All students should feel welcome in their school, not just those who engage in a particular religious practice. Thank you.
Because students are particularly impressionable and attendance is mandatory, you're kind of saying the quiet part out loud. You're saying the entire reason why all these Republicans that you hate so much, all these people, you are now understanding that the very problem we've had. Of course, kids are very impressionable. That's why you hang rainbow flags at the entrances of these schools. Walk into any Fayette County public school, you will find a rainbow and trans flag at the entrance. That's why they insist on having sexually graphic books in the schools. That's why they push DEI. And that's why you push all of it. And it is a religious practice at the altar of leftism. And you push it because you know children are easily impressionable and that they are have to be there. But yet a moment of silence, well, that's too much to handle. We'll be digging more into this after this short break. You're listening to The Andrew Cooperrider Show. Want to reach out to the show? Feel free to email info@theandrewshow.com. And you are back with The Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. If you want to reach out to the show, feel free to email info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. Before the break, we were talking about House Bill 96, a bill to require 2 minutes of quiet meditation or self-reflection or prayer possibly at the beginning of each school day in our public education. And we were going over the Democrats' arguments against this. We played one video where the first claim was that this was somehow unconstitutional and that these kids are impressionable. And that we're forcing our religion, you're forcing Christianity on these impressionable kids that have to be at school. And that's why kids can't be taught religion at school. Now, there's no moment of realization from Democrats that that's exactly what they've been doing, indoctrinating kids into their thought processes at school. That self-realization isn't there. But what about it being unconstitutional? They think the fact that prayer's even mentioned in the bill, that means it must be unconstitutional. But the bill actually specifically says that the policy shall prohibit district personnel from providing instruction to any student regarding what they need to engage in. It also says that they have an individual choice to either meditate, pray, or engage in any other silent activity. It isn't forced praying. It specifically says they have the choice to do whatever they would wish. And that is one of the options. And it says teachers can't tell them to pray. Well, but is that constitutional? Well, if you want to talk Constitution on this issue, we can roll over to the Santa Fe Independent School District v. Doe, a ruling out of the Supreme Court, which says this: nothing in the Constitution, as interpreted by this court, prohibits any public school student from voluntarily praying at any time before, during, or after the school day. Now, they want to say that this isn't voluntary because you have to sit there in silence, but you're not being forced to pray. The school isn't leading you in prayer. So even based upon prior constitutionality points, it seems fine. And it's not the first time this conversation has happened. Because a moment of silence for you to think quietly is in of itself is not necessarily religious or tyrannical in somehow or some way. It's a funny assertion that a moment of silence is somehow pushing religion has no place in government from the same people, these same Democrats, in this same chamber that just this week had a moment of silence for Rocky Atkins' dad who's passed away. They held a moment of silence for him. But that wasn't considered tyrannical to have a moment of silence. That wasn't pushing Christianity to have a moment of silence for the dead. No. But if you have a moment of silence at school, even when the teachers are specifically forbade from telling kids to pray during it, it somehow is still tyrannical. Somehow is. But even that to the side. Look, the idea that children or anyone is free from government being influenced by religion, whether it's Judeo-Christian values or otherwise, is laughable. Of course, our government and our elected people are informed by their worldviews, by their value systems. And when the left gives up Judeo-Christian values, they adopt these values of communism, of leftism, of classism, of gender theory. They put on a new set of beliefs. And if you think I'm lying, just think about this for a second. They take it on faith that their clerics are saying the truth. I mean, they literally disregard their common sense for these beliefs. They take it on faith that gender is somehow a construct by society. There's never been a time where they've been able to point to a society that didn't somehow construct gender, but they say it exists. They promise it does. But it's literally the idea here. Okay. I mean, our founders literally believed that government should exist to protect God-given rights. God-given rights. Now, freedom of religion to them means you cannot be forced by government to take part in a religion, but it has no bearing on if government wants to pray before a meeting, but you're not forced to. Every single moment, every single day of session in that legislature, there is a moment of religious prayer. I mean, you can put up the Ten Commandments as long as you're not being forced to look at them. That is what our founders believed. This idea that government which would be completely free of religion would be laughable. Our founders would literally be so confused by this idea. They'd say, what? No religion, no God. Where does your morality come from when it comes to passing laws then? What is informing you? It would be a real head scratcher. It would be incomprehensible to them, but somehow we've allowed these liberals to grab control of this idea of freedom of religion to mean that freedom of religion doesn't just mean you can't be forced into religion, but that religion can't be a part of government at all. And that was never the intention, obviously, when you look at our founding documents. But I can't expect them to believe this. I can't expect them at all. I mean, these people clearly don't want kids to think for themselves. They want kids to think about how much the left controls their life. If they're not talking about gender, if they're not talking about liberal values, if they're not talking about kids being allowed to use the bathroom, if they're not announcing about the gay straight alliance meeting, if they're not saying about how inclusive and together and diversity and equity, if they're not teaching them that everybody's a victim or everybody's racist, well, I mean, somebody's got to, so they have to do it. Let's look at Representative Sarah Stalker. She had an opinion on this. Let's take a look at what she had to say.
I would like to extend this invitation to our students on some things that they might want to use this time to be reflective of. Maybe you could think about how many of your classmates and Kentucky children are food insecure, or how many students are experiencing or on the verge of experiencing homelessness, or how many kids are being abused and neglected, how many kids will participate in an active shooter drill today, or what lawmakers are doing to address any of these real issues, and why are they passing laws forcing for you to participate in a moment of silence. That is not the policy solution to the many issues that we have.
I bet you she's real fun at parties, right? I bet you she is just real fun at parties. I mean, leave it to a Democrat to try to take an argument about why a moment of silence is bad, about why it should be good and helpful for children to have this, to now turn around and turn it into literally a moment of saying, hey, why don't you think about all this depressing stuff? Why don't we get you down to start off your day? Now, I know she's not actually saying that, of course, because, well, she doesn't actually believe it. She doesn't follow through with that thought process. She knows kids aren't going to think about it, but she's using that as a point to demonstrate to legislators that there's real issues going on with these kids and you're not addressing them. Well, what are those real issues? This is the point they miss. You're not addressing them. What about these school shooter drills? School shootings in schools, you're not dealing with them. Is it so crazy for you to think that maybe kids having a moment to meditate and think, possibly pray, possibly find a greater meaning than themselves, possibly to have a moment of self-reflection might prevent a school shooting? I mean, if you really want to prevent all these ails of kids, I mean, truthfully, honestly, if you want to actually say, you know what, these ills of children, we need to address them, the number one thing you could do would be to push Judeo-Christian values on these kids. You know why? Because kids of parents who aren't divorced, aren't single parents, are much better off than kids who aren't. Judeo-Christian values backs up the belief and idea of monogamy, of parents staying together, of parents rearing children together, that man and women both have a role in a child's life. Those are Judeo-Christian values. You would be pushing that. You want to deal with kids having existential problems as far as finding self-worth, leading to depression and suicide, drug use, and potentially school shootings? Well, Judeo-Christian values are great for that because it teaches that you have value no matter who you are from God. Literally, the same values you're standing up there throwing a fit about are the same very ones that could save these kids. But you can't admit that. Can't say that. Because it has to be government that fixes all the problems. They got to be coming to you to fix the problems. The idea that these parents and that these kids, by finding good conservative values, can deal with their ills, well, that can't be handled. Can't. That goes against everything she believes in. She doesn't believe in Judeo-Christian values. She doesn't believe. She thinks that's what's destroyed society, despite all the evidence to the contrary. Despite when you look at literally every single commandment from God through Christian faith, you see something different. Now, it isn't just the liberals in the House who had arguments about this. Of course, if you go over to the online, you have arguments. One is Republicans are forcing kids to be silent in schools. What do you think kids are forced to do now in schools but be silent? Like, that's literally all they do in schools most of the time, is to sit there silently and learn. Like, that's a good thing. Forcing kids to be quiet. The kids are forced to be quiet in schools now. But what, if you do it for 2 minutes in the mornings, that's too much? They're being forced to do it all day. But 2 minutes in the morning, I can't handle that. Tyranny. That's real tyranny right there. Another common claim is, of course, this is pushing prayer into schools, even though the bill specifically is not doing that. It's just allowing 2 minutes of reflection. Now, another one people say is, well, what if a kid starts pulling out a prayer mat? What if some Muslim kid starts pulling out a prayer mat and praying? To which I say, great. Do they not realize that Judeo-Christian values, religious values, that Muslim beliefs and Judeo-Christian values have a lot in common? Do you think I would have a problem with that as long as it's a reformed Muslim belief that doesn't believe in killing anybody who's not a Muslim? Yes, I would love children to have a religious belief about a higher power that has some sort of moral compass that isn't leftism. That's not a you gotcha. And coming up after this, we're going to go over a few more bills, a few more situations working on through the legislature. We'll be back after this short break. Hey, y'all, you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We've got some bills that have worked their way kind of through one of the House or Senate, one of the two chambers. Actually, they've only passed one bill through both chambers. But we've got a few bills worth mentioning. Senate Bill 50. That's right now being considered in the Senate. Should get a vote this week, if not today. Senate Bill 50 allowing 5,000 gallons, allows 5,000 gallons of liquor, distilled spirits, to be direct distributed by the distiller. Up to 5,000 gallons, craft distiller. So currently in Kentucky, so when you go down to your local bar and you order a Bud Light, a bottle of Bud Light or a can of Bud Light, if you decide you hate yourself, or if you order something with actual taste, something a little bit nicer, maybe something like a Country Boy, maybe something a little bit more hefty. But let's say you hate yourself, so you go down and you order your Bud Light. Let's say that bar runs out of Bud Lights because, a gay pride parade was in town. So they run out of Bud Lights, and they go down to the store. Now, if you go down to Walmart, you buy a case of Bud Lights off the shelf, and then you take it over to your bar and then sell it. That is illegal in the state of Kentucky. You, as a bar who's licensed to sell alcohol, cannot go to Walmart and buy beer. You have to buy it through a distributor, same as liquor. In fact, up until a few years ago, beer brewers and bourbon distillers could not sell even on their own premises. So if you went over, to Buffalo Trace or something to take a tour, and then you went to buy a bottle, that bottle's not just they pulled it off a line. They have to sell those bottles to a distributor, then buy them back from the distributor to be able to sell them on site. This entire wholesale process completely created and by the Kentucky government in order to protect the entire wholesale industry. I mean, it's literally creating an industry that otherwise pretty much wouldn't exist if it wasn't for government regulations. And so they've taken some aims at loosening this up in order to allow these budgeting and growing distillers and brewers to have a chance in the market. Because if you want to sell your beer, sell your liquor, sell something like that, well, you have to go to a distributor. The distributor then has to sell it. But the distributor is also selling many a liquor, some of them a lot more popular. And they may not be out there really pushing your liquor too much or your beer that you're making too much. And so therefore the new brewery, the new distillery, that new brand can't survive because it's not of interest to the distributors to bother to push. And so Senate Bill 50 would allow 5,000 gallons, or to say that another way, that's 100 barrels of bourbon if it was a bourbon, or about the equivalent of 25,000 fifths, enough to probably supply 13 to 20 bars or so, depending on how popular your liquor is, but enough to kind of get you going. So it allows these distillers to directly then sell that liquor to bars or restaurants or places that have their license to sell. An important kind of step to make if you want these kind of craft distillers to have a chance at growing, at taking on the big cats, because they need to be able to go out there and sell their alcohol directly to these bars themselves. And also, once they maybe have 5,000 gallons moving a year, well, it's more likely that a alcohol distributor will pick them up and will push them heavily, unlike what they have going on right now. We've got another thing happening in the House with the budget bill. It's been winding its way through the legislature. Been having some committee hearings on it this week. One point on the budget, though, deals with funding of school transportation. So you've heard a lot about this as we've had our Jefferson County public schools, those are Louisville public schools, absolutely, completely, and utterly fail anything even remotely close to an operable busing system for kids. I mean, we're talking 40-minute bus rides. We're talking hours-long waits. We're talking having to cancel a school because they messed up their busing system so much. And, the common attack by the left was, well, you're not funding busing enough. This is all the Republicans' fault. And then rather than saying, no, you're not handling your money well, or no, the district, we give you funding. We already give you almost 50% of our general fund. You're also pulling in a lot of money from the federal government. You also are taxing locally. Instead of telling JCTC, Jefferson County Public Schools, JCPC, hey, y'all are spending over $20,000 a student and have the worst busing system in the state. Maybe that's your fault and has nothing to do with the state, but your inability to manage resources and money. In fact, you may remember that these bus drivers went on quote unquote strike. Not really, they're not allowed to strike, but they went on a sick out, and quote unquote unorganized sick out, in order to point attention to problems that they're having within the transportation, within the busing problems at Jefferson County Public Schools. And they made a list of demands, or put out a list of demands. And you know what wasn't on the list? Pay us more. That wasn't on the list. Wasn't there. But despite that, the lack of being able to properly explain their point, Republicans have just, I guess, in the House decided to give in. And they were already raising the money. They were already going from $274 million set aside for public school funding to $359 million in year two of this budget. We budget for 2 years at a time. In year two of this budget, that's almost an $80 million, or an $80 million. It is basically an $80 million jump from 274 to 359, over $80 million jump, 85 million. They're already jumping that much. Well, in committee, we find out it's going to be an even bigger bump to $399 million, another $40 million on top of their $80 million bump. They're getting, in 2 years, basically 1 year, a bump from 274 to 399. That is a massive increase. That's like $125 million of increase. $125 million on 274. That's almost a 50% increase in funding for busing. This is what's really important. According to KDE, Kentucky Department of Education, because let's break this down, right? So it's a lot of money. But you're saying, Andrew, well, they're just funding busing for the school districts. And really, there's a big problem here with that. There's a big problem with the entire idea here. This is why you don't turn to the state and ask them to bus your kids, because they have such inflated expenses and costs. Hugely inflated. Where it doesn't, you can't even figure out where the money is going anymore when you go through and you look at their budgets. You're like, what are you all doing with this money? They can't tell you. They can't tell you. So according to Kentucky Department of Education, they bus 385,000 kids a year. That's how many kids ride school buses, 385,000 in Kentucky, from the Kentucky Department of Education. That's their number, not my number. I didn't cook that up. That is their number. So the question is well, is this enough money? What's that work out to? Well, that works out to just over $1,000, $1,036 a year per kid. Y'all, the actual school, the state itself, okay, gives right around about $4,200, $4,300 a year per child for education here in Kentucky. That's what they give out to the school districts for that. This is like 25% of it. So quarter of the cost of what it costs per child from the state to educate them is what it costs to bus them. It seems high. Now you say $1,000, that might be right in line. How's those numbers line out, Andrew? You're a numbers guy. You like to talk about the numbers. How do those numbers line out when we really start to dig in and take a look at them? Well, I'll be going over that after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. Hey, y'all, you're back with this final segment of the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. If you want to reach out to the show, feel free to email info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. Before the break, we were talking about the legislature giving almost $400 million a year to our K-12 schools for public education. And the math on this points to exactly why asking our public dollars, our public schools, our governments, our local governments to be funded so much by the state and federal government is such a terrible idea. Not just as is a bad idea because it opens you up to being regulated by large groups of people. The fact that the federal government gives so much money to our K through 12 education is the reason why the federal government, Biden, others, right now Biden, are able to put rules in place like, when it comes to things like the trans bathroom issue that Biden administration has talked about, tying whether or not you get federal dollars to whether or not you allow a dude that thinks he's a woman to pee amongst little girls. That's just one of those things. So the minute you start taking money from a source, you've now opened yourself up to regulation from that source. All these Democrats throwing a fit about this moment of silence, something you never thought you'd see. This moment of silence situation shows just how crazy they've gotten. But if they don't want to be, quote unquote, forced into a moment of silence, well, then having the state fund so much of education, well, that should be something you'd want to move away from. But of course they don't. They want more and more money. They ask for more money from the state. But not only is it opening yourself up to regulation from all across the entire body, whether it's regulation from federal government or the state when you take money from them, but it also isn't the most efficient way to do this. And it's very clear when you see this public school transportation situation. So for some reason, a while ago, the legislature indicated through law that they would go ahead and fully fund all costs of child transportation, all costs of school busing. I don't know why. It was back like in the 90s or something. Probably just a bunch of Democrats thought, oh, this sounds great to have the state involved in something like school busing, a decision uniquely made so much at the local level because of local concerns. And so the legislature has saw fit to set aside basically $400 million, $399 million a year for these in 1 year for transportation funding for our K through 12 kids. So as I said, Kentucky Department of Education says that around 385,000 school kids here in Kentucky ride the bus. So that's $1,036 a year per kid, or about $6 per day per kid. That may not sound like a lot, but let's break this down. Okay, so one bus in one day will handle about 110 students a day. So that's between elementary and high school. So they handle transportation around elementary. They also handle transportation at the high school level. So, they'll stagger start times. The same bus is doing the same thing. And because of that as well, you have the same bus staff. So that works out to $670 a day per bus at $6 per kid, 110-ish. It's a little over $6 per kid. At 110-ish students a day works out to about $660, $670 a day per bus. So if the bus drivers are driving 7 hours a day And the all-in driver compensation cost is $30 an hour. Okay, because remember, these school bus drivers are seasonal employees. I think, if I remember properly, here in Lexington, they're being paid like $17.76 an hour. If I remember the ad, it could have been bumped up. But even if they're being paid $25 an hour, all-in comp $30 an hour, it's probably much lower in other areas, but let's just say it's $30 an hour. So that's $210 a day. And then nowadays, because kids are unruly and awful because their parents aren't doing their job, and of course we've done everything we can to kill Judeo-Christian values, so now you need bus monitors to make sure that they're behaving so the bus driver isn't distracted. So let's say we throw in a bus monitor at $20 an hour, all-in costs, so that's about $140 a day. So now that leaves $320 a day for fuel and maintenance. Now, according to Thomas Buses, the average yearly fuel cost is about $5,000 a year for your average school bus. So that works out to $29 a day. Even if we double that to $60 a day, let's say Thomas Buses is off by half. Let's say somehow you found a bus that drives and costs twice as much as what the number one bus manufacturer in the nation says. So let's say you somehow double that to 60. Well, now that leaves $260 a day for what? You've paid the driver, you've paid the fuel cost, you've paid the bus monitor. What, $260 for what? Maintenance and oil changes? Is the oil getting changed every single day on the bus? Does each bus have its own maintenance person that when they pull in to the bus garage, that maintenance person works on them for 8 hours that day and is paid $300 or $260 for that work? I mean, that figure is too big by 25%. 25% more than it needs to be, right? That almost 400 million, 100 million of it, we don't know where it's going because it's not hitting, and forgive the pun here, but the rubber ain't meeting the road with $100 million a year. So that means we have $100 million, 25% in lossage in either administrative fees, inflated costs, school misfunding, and as such. Which is exactly why the state shouldn't be going into this. They need $100 million because of all the money being lost and the administrative process of getting these monies out. Well, you got to pay a person or two or three at the top to hand this money out to the schools, and then of course the schools got to receive it. They apparently 25% of their costs goes into maintenance and supplies and management of the bus drivers. I mean, and keep in mind, we're talking about $260 a day. There is more costs, okay? More costs, or basically the same costs in labor as there is in this phantom cost we can't think of. We can't find $250 or $350 a day for labor, $60 a day on the high side for fuel. Where's this 260 going? That's a whole nother person per bus a year that can be paid for. And it's because that's why the schools shouldn't be getting involved. Now, I did have, I want to talk about John Dice article. Dice, it doesn't really matter how you say his name. Never can get it right. Longtime listeners know that I tore into him last time he wrote an op-ed, and well, he put out a new op-ed in his attempt to remain somehow somebody worth talking about, somehow somebody worth giving attention to. But I don't think I have time to go over that. I got about 2 minutes left. So on a deflated point, on a not as exciting point, not really the way I'd like to end the week, I will talk about one more bill just kind of interest. This bill here that's passed one part of the House deals with rental equipment. So apparently in law, it's been unclear exactly if it's illegal to keep a piece of equipment longer than your rental agreement, and it's unclear if it's theft or not. So a law here has passed the House. that would say having control of rental equipment under a written rental agreement. The person intentionally holds the equipment beyond the expiration of the rental period without consent of the owner of the equipment and intentionally deprives the owner of the equipment of its use in further rentals. So basically, it's called theft of services. So they're working on this law, probably pass, where if you keep a rental, intentionally keep it, and refuse to pay, they give you 5 days after notice to return it. And if you refuse to do that and make agreeable payments to the rental agency within 30 days receipt of that, then now you can be charged with theft by deception. So that's kind of interesting. Another point of interest that's going through is something, House Bill 137 deals with assistant county attorneys. Law used to say assistant county attorneys must live within the county or within 30 miles of the county line or in just an attached county. So either a county touching the county they work in or within 30 miles of the county line if they're not just living in a county attached to it. This removes that residency requirement completely, allowing assistant county attorneys to be hired from anywhere within the state. So that's pretty interesting. Just some things to talk about. They also formed an AI task force for the legislature to stay up to date on what's going on in AI. So there you go. There's some news for you there to top it off. Hopefully you had a great week. We'll see you back here on Monday for the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Have a great weekend.